Alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu wa nashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa nashhadu anna sayyidina wa sanadina wa shafi'ana Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu amma ba'd. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله صدق الله العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وارحم على عبدك ورسولك سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله كما صليت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. So before I began, I shared a technical reason why we had to delay the talk. I also took the opportunity to reflect on what I was trying to accomplish in the series, and I actually have changed the way I've organized the whole series. So what happened was that last time when we got cut off and I had this time, I was rereading the different works of Imam al-Ghazālī that I shared with you in the first session. And a very strange thing happened. This is the barakah of Ramadan, or the barakah of, the barakah of Ta'khir, is that I reflected, and upon reflection I realized that I was trying to do too much in this series. It's not possible to do a series that at once is for non-Muslims, at the same time for Muslims. And secondly, a lot of the things Imam al-Ghazālī rahimahullah ta'ala writes about and was thinking about are quite complicated. And it's interesting that he himself in all of these works mentions many times warnings and precautions about engaging in theology and the limits and of the benefits of theological inquiry. And so what I've decided now is to actually simplify much more than I was originally going to do, at least for this series in Ramadan. And we can save the more complex, complicated issues for maybe a more academic type of course that we can, inshallah, offer sometime later on in our life, if Allah Ta'ala wills. The second thing I also, so this is the first major change. The first set of major changes. The second major change is, inshallah, I actually want to show you more from the Qur'an Kareem, because I think there are many, many verses that Imam al-Ghazālī rahimahullah ta'ala did not actually use, because he was making very specific and particular theological arguments and had a very particular audience in mind, and was living obviously in a very specific time and context. So I want to make it more universal, and I will actually be looking at many different verses of Quran, many different aspects beyond what I had originally planned. And so today's going to be the first day I'm going to do that. But before I begin that, I just want to review what I had ended with you on last time. So I was mentioning that when we're trying to learn more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what should our relationship be with Him, that this was a list of things that I had given you. So very briefly, number one, the master source is revelation, which means scripture, Qur'an, Kitab, Qur'an al-Kareem, and prophecy, which means Nubuwah, the Sunnah, the Hadith, the teachings of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. These are the master sources, right? And these will govern, will adjudicate, will be hakam, will decide, will be an arbiter over all of the other sources of our knowledge. But it's important, at the same time, it's important to realize that the revelation, prophecy, wahi, kitab, and sunnah do not exist in an abstract vacuum. They have to be engaged. You have to interact with them. You have to dive deeply into them. You have to reflect and ponder over them. And the rest of the list is basically different ways we will do that. The first is reason. So if you remember, I mentioned that there's a sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed people with a reason and aql, that they would be able to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not in a complete way, but in an adequate, elementary way, even before they had received revelation and prophecy. Right? We're going to come back to that. That is something we're going to look at. By the way, I hope that all of you are listening to this talk in this series had the chance to listen to an earlier talk I gave a couple of weeks ago on Revelation. I have had that put to the front of the channel So inshallah, that should be the talk that you see when you open the channel. And that is something I think that is like a prerequisite and a precursor. It means something you should listen to before this series. So hopefully in this gap of time we had, all of you were able to listen to that. If you haven't, do listen to that. And I will come back in this series as well onto this notion of reason. The second issue is knowledge, right? And obviously knowledge requires you to use your reason, but it's ilm. So reason would be aql, knowledge would be ilm. That is based on a deep study, understanding, reflection, and pondering of the Qur'an and the Sunnah. Spirituality, experience, and emotion, then I lumped these three things together, and this is where we had ended last time, so this will conclude our review. This is through practice. Now I want to say a few things which I wasn't able to say last time, or I think maybe I said but did not make it into the recording. Allahu alam. Khair. What I'm about to say is very, very important. Unless you are practicing, and this is one of the reasons why I am now tailoring this series to Muslims, although non-Muslims are welcome to listen and understand, and they will get a very insider perspective and understanding of how we think about God. If you are not practicing, if you are not prostrating, if you do not do amal, you do not do itaat, you do not practice worship, obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you embark on your journey of just reason and knowledge without practice, without spirituality, without experience, without these things, if you just use reason and knowledge, you will actually end up in a flawed understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first thing that will happen is you will find the verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about His might, His majesty, His wrath, His punishment, too hard to bear. You won't be able to understand them. Why? Because you have not in your heart experienced the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the tender kindness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you won't then be able to understand the verses about punishment and hellfire and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's anger and vengeance, ghadab, and intiqam, dhu intiqam, in light of that. So that's why it's actually, I'm going to suggest that unless you have spirituality and some experience and some emotions and feelings and humility which comes through obedience and submission, your knowledge will be flawed. I think this is also one way that certain modernist Muslims have gone astray, is that they're lacking in these things, right? They're lacking in the things below the word knowledge. And they're relying exclusively or entirely, or in better cases, mostly on reason and knowledge. And they don't have the right balance, all right? And that's why today, for example, I'm going to take the series in a different direction, one that is not sort of academic theology a la Imam al-Ghazālī, rahimahullah ta'ala, but it can be very good, and inshallah you will enjoy it when you see it. Inshallah, that will bring us to these feelings of spirituality, experience, and emotion. All right, when you practice Islam, you will feel the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You will experience that qurb. You will feel a spiritual connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you will get the emotions of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you will be able to feel the emotion of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you have the emotion, and listen to this carefully, when you have the emotion of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your heart, then you're ready to process the knowledge of the verses in Revelation that talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wrath and punishment. But when you do not yet have that emotion in your heart, you will not be able to process that knowledge. Right? Humility at every stage of this journey. So, that person who has not yet received revelation or encountered the teachings of prophecy, and they're beginning the journey on the basis of their own aql, their own fitra, the inner innate human disposition, if they don't have humility at the outset, that mere reason and disposition will not lead them to the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Second stage, that person who now believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has iman in revelation and prophecy, and is now in the knowledge stage, is learning and studying and reflecting and pondering upon the teachings of Islam. If they don't have humility, they will also not be able to properly understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Third, if any person feels anything, has an experience, a spiritual connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, feeling of love, feeling of fear, and they're not humble about that, instead, they make the mistake of thinking that they're somehow accomplished or they've reached some daraja of Sufism, they've reached some level of wilaya, they've reached some stage in their quote-unquote suluk, right? They don't have humility, then again, they will fall prey to a misunderstanding in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's the humility that keeps a person on obedience. It's the humility that keeps a person on submission. And it's the humility, obedience, and submission that keeps attracting from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless a person with spirituality, that Allah ta'ala will open up for them experiences in their heart, and that Allah ta'ala will inspire their hearts with further emotions and feelings for Him. And then with all of that, sixth, then they will keep processing that knowledge, such that for such a person, knowledge truly should be a lifelong pursuit, because knowledge blended with spirituality and obedience and submission and humility continues to bear fruit upon fruit. And in all of that, then in the background, the lowest level of their activity will be the rational faculty. It will be there. It will continue to be used. Allah Ta'ala indeed made us humans, animals who are rational, but it is the least of the tools. And yes, it will also be lasting like the rest of them. All right. So today I want to take you through another set of verses, which obviously we were reciting in these first few days of Ramadan and hearing in Taraweeh. And then it occurred to me that why not use this passage in Qur'an al-Kareem in Surah al-Baqarah to understand who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So in other words, often we use this passage in Quran to understand what Ramadan is. I'll do a little bit of that, but I want to use this passage that Allah Ta'ala is the creator of Ramadan. That's also one of His attributes. That's also one of His acts. That's also a way we can understand Him. So now what am I going to do? I'm going to borrow, for those of you who attended our series last year, our own slides from last year. And those of you who did not attend that series last year, you can also benefit from that this year because it is on the YouTube channel. And that is where we did the tafsir commentary of selected verses of the Qur'an al-Kareem for the first, I believe, 16 ajza, first 16 juz. And certainly in the first 15 to 16 days of Ramadan, this is the portion that people are hearing the Imam recite in Taraweeh, and the people are reciting individually. So I'm going to use this passage. I will explain a little bit about Ramadan, but I'm using it, and I'm using this as an example that actually every single passage of Qur'an al-Kareem, irrespective of what it's about, right? And we will obviously approach Qur'an al-Kareem to understand what Allah Ta'ala is telling us in that passage, but ultimately every passage of Qur'an al-Kareem is kalamullah, not just the verses, which I had mentioned the way I explained it to you in the first day, not just the verses in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Himself or reveals His names or attributes and acts, but actually any and every verse of Qur'an al-Kareem, min haythu annahu kalamullah, from the perspective that it is kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is His divine speech, which is His divine attribute, which is inextricably, eternally linked and identical to His essence, His that, means we learn about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through that. We learn about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through any and every passage, verse of Qur'an al-Kareem. All right. So here, how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begin? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا. So what we learn here is that actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from His master plan, is His wish, His pre-eternal wish, desire, irada, and His hukam, His command, that there will be people who have iman in Him. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a being who wants to live and exist, rather, right? You can say live also for Allah Ta'ala, al-hayyul qayyum la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a being who wished to exist in the state that He was. So understand, I think I explained this to you again on the first day, but these things bear repetition and bear us to look at them over and over again from different perspectives, different angles, using different verses. So one common phrase that is used to explain Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, huwa al-an kama kan, huwa al-an kama kan. He exists now in exactly the way He has always existed. But there's no difference in his existence and his essence. But before he created any creation, and let alone before he created the Anbiya and humanity, when at that moment there was no creation such as human beings who had Iman in him. So this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and wish. In other words, that he should be known and he should be believed in. Alright? So that is this is one way that the Quranic understanding of God is very different from this panentheistic entity or some abstract supernatural force in nature or some abstract supreme being who may not be even interested in the world. No. The Quranic concept of God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is deeply, deeply engaged, deeply purposive in his creation. Right? And then, after all of this aspects of creation, sending hidayah and guidance and scripture, kitab and wahi, revelation and prophets, there will emerge then a group of humanity who are alladhina amanu, those who have iman, those who have faith and belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. Kutiba alaykum as-siyam, kama kutiba alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. Min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. Alright. So here, the way some of the ulama have explained this is this word here, kutiba. So this is called fi'l majhul. It means in English this is the passive form of the verb. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is about to reveal a commandment, an obligation. Right? The obligation for us as alladhina amanu to perform an act of obedience. That is difficult. It's more difficult than salah. It's more difficult than paying your zakah. And generally, it's difficult to fast. I felt this year, and I'm embarrassed, and it's important that we share these things with all of you, that I'm embarrassed to admit that this past year I didn't keep as many optional fasts as I normally would try to do, and even that wasn't a great amount. And so what happened to me this year is that the fasts of Ramadan were more difficult, right? And those who, mashallah, fast regularly Mondays and Thursdays, or 13th, 14th, and 15th, or who follow the Sunnah of fasting even more than that, or even more than they normally do in the year in Shaban, they may not have had those physical growing pains in the first couple of days in Ramadan that me certainly, and maybe many of you also had. Point is that siyam is difficult. It's difficult in summer months. It was difficult for the original recipients of Qur'an, Sahaba Kiram radiallahu ta'ala anhum, because they lived in desert-like environments. So because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is part of his tender mercy, this is the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's almost like, this is not the perfect vocabulary, but it's almost like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because in the hadith, Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has used this word about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shy. Just take the soul of that believer whose hairs have grown white in Iman. So it's almost like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shy in telling the believers that this intense obligation of this intense obedience, and it can be quite difficult act of obedience, is going to be placed on them. So he is using the passive form. So this also shows who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that being who is tender, kind, merciful, soft, and gentle on his believers. And yes, he will command them to fulfill obligatory acts of obedience, but he does it in a very tender, gentle way. And this is why also kama kutiba alladhina min qablikum, Allah is also mentioning that, look, this is everybody's had to go through this. All believers in the past also had to go through this. You're not being singled out for the difficult act of obedience. Okay, so the literal translation is as it had been prescribed, mandated, literally written upon those who were prior to you, la'allakum tattaqun, so that you may get taqwa. So what we learn from this also, though the word al-hadi is not in this verse, the word hidayah is not in this verse, but it's clear that Allah Ta'ala is guiding, He's caring, He's nurturing the believers. He's bringing them towards a higher state that, okay, look, you came to Iman on what? On that basis of your reason and your knowledge and your faith and your belief. Now you have to make another journey towards taqwa. And that requires amal, that requires some practice, some actions, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to guide us and inspire us. All right. The rest of let's move a little bit faster here. Ayyama ma'dudat, that this is going to be a limited numbers of days, enumerated days, right? And that we all know that is a particular lunar month. All right. فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَإِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ. Those of you who may be sick or may be traveling, all right, then you may enumerate those days. In other words, you may fast on those days, those number of days, on some other days. All right. So I'm going to go a little bit, because those of you remember the tafsir of this verse, it's a bit linguistically complicated, this particular word. Generally, I will just summarize that for those who are physically unable to fast, what they should do, they should feed a poor person. Okay? Fidyatun ta'amu miskin. They should feed the miskin. I'd explained this once before, that faqir and miskin are two words that come in Qur'an Kareem for a poor person. Miskin is extremely poor, destitute, indigent, right? A person who is in dire and straitened circumstances, so that you should feed them. All right. Okay, فَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ. And whoever does optionally more, who presents himself for even more. So this can be taken immediately to refer to feeding more than just the one miskin, or feeding them more than what may be minimally required. It can also be taken just to generally offer even more charity. So the notion here is Allah Ta'ala is training us that, look, if we're unable to fast due to a legitimate reason, right? Let's take this one, that we're ill. You should feel the lack of fasting, and you should make up for that in these different ways. Okay, and that is better for them. So this is where the feeling part comes in. Okay. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does say, "But antasumu khairul lakum in kuntum ta'lamun," that if you were to fast, that's even better for you if only you knew. All right. So this is the notion. This is to address people who are 50-50. I'm not sure how sick I am. Am I too sick to fast? And therefore I should offer the fidya, which is the sort of expiation for not fasting by feeding a poor person. Should I do even more than that, or could I actually fast? So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making it clear for anyone who can fast in a way that does not seriously aggravate their illness, exacerbate their illness, then it is better for them to fast if only they knew that. All right. Next thing. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن. So we've already explained this, that the month of Ramadan is the month, or we explained this in the Preparing for Ramadan talk, not in this series, that the month of Ramadan is the month in which was revealed the Qur'an al-Kareem. All right. So there's another thing. To who? Hudan linnas. So this also shows you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quranic understanding of God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not just for the believers, for all of humanity. He cares about all of humanity. Ra'uf with nas. He wants to send his guidance to all of humanity. Hudan linnas. The Quran is being sent as a guidance for all of humanity. وَبَيِّنَاتٍ مِّنَ الْهُدَى. And they are clear signs and proofs from his, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's, guidance. وَالْفُرْقَانِ. And it is a criteria and will enable them to distinguish and discern from true and false. All right. So this is another very important aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we understand. So I'm going to skip the next part because it's a repetition. All right. يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by means of this fast, wants and desires ease for you. And He does not wish, by means of this fast, He does not desire hardship for you. So what does that mean? Right? This is also something. First is a general principle. Again, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is soft and tender and kind and merciful and loving and benevolent and caring for believers. But if you look at it rationally, right? Rationally, not fasting would be ease, and fasting is hardship. But in that passage of the Quran, so it's not just a verse, you have to sometimes look at Quran in chunks, right? And really, the master level of knowledge is to understand the entire Quran al-Kareem as an entire integrated whole that it is. Khair. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, on the one hand, His soft and tender, gentle, merciful love is that He would always want what is ease for you. It's almost like, like a mother would always want you to have ease in your life, but sometimes she makes you do difficult things, right? Sometimes she makes you do difficult things. All right. This is not, it's really, this verse, again, where the modernists misunderstand this verse, is they think that this verse is to be used to lift obligations and lift acts of obedience. Whereas if you look, where has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself placed this verse in Qur'an, it is in the passage in which He is enacting an obligation and calling to us in obedience, which is a major obedience of 29 to 30 days of fasting from dawn to sunset. So clearly this understanding of this verse is not to remove obligations. Rather, it is to create an attitude in us that we should not view the obligations in the Sharia as difficult or as burdens, but actually we should view them as sources of ease and tranquility and contentment, and certainly they will be a source for us to have ease in the next life. Okay. وَلِتُكْمِلُوا الْإِدَّةَ, and then وَلِتُكْمِلُوا الْإِدَّةَ, so that you may complete the number of days of the prescribed month of fasting in the prescribed month of Ramadan. And now what's this? وَلِتُكَبِّرُوا اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ, so that you may magnify and proclaim the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of what He has guided you to. Right? So actually, our response when we receive this command to fast in Ramadan is to do takbir, is to magnify and proclaim the greatness, kibriyai of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that how great Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And we are so happy to receive this command and obligation to fast, and we subject ourselves to that command to fast. All right? Now this is a general principle on every aspect of hidayah that Allah Ta'ala sent to us. We proclaim His greatness, as opposed to what the modernists would want us to do. Okay, He has sent this in the Quran, but let's analyze it, let's assess it, does it fit in today's context, let's check it according to today's society, let's import some other type of epistemology, secular, liberal, Western, any and every type of epistemology, way of understanding knowledge and truth, and let's assess this command according to that. No. Just because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent it as part of its hidayah, it is great, He is great, and we will do takbir. This is what we do. We receive a command, we say Allahu Akbar, we proclaim and magnify the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then what do we do? وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, and then we make shukr, and happily so that you may become people who are grateful. So now I'm addressing ourselves, that we should be grateful and thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is an example of what I was telling you. You get knowledge from revelation, and it's supposed to lead to humility and submission. وَلَتُكَبِّرُوا, it's supposed to lead to feelings. Tashkurun, right? And it also has to be practiced. وَلِتُكْمِلُوا الْإِدَّةَ, it has to be practiced. Otherwise, it's just the knowledge itself is not sufficient. All right. I wanted to show another couple of things in the broader chunk now, so we're going to sort of zoom out a bit and look a little bit further than just the verses specifically about Ramadan. So immediately after this is another very important verse. I want to link it to Ramadan, link it to our understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي أَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is proclaiming in the Qur'an and telling that, and when Ibadi, my servants and slaves, Sa'ala, ask you, singular Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So what does it mean? That when the Sahaba ask you, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Anni, about me. Okay, so what do we learn here? Right? This is what Sahaba Kareem used to do. What was the greatest thing they wanted to know from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam? What was the greatest thing they wanted to know about? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They wanted to know more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Qur'an, the revelation that came piecemeal unto them just put a thirst in them. They wanted to know more and more and more. I think sometimes Sahaba would look at people like you and me, like, you people are so lucky you've had all the Qur'an from the get-go. We got it over 22 years. We were thirsty and thirsty for when would the next verse come, and when it came, we'd be so happy, and we would imagine, right, that how were we even living our lives prior to receiving this verse? And you people, you are the ummah who got all entire Qur'an Kareem in one shot at the very outset, and you're so lucky you can live your entire life from day one in light of the entire Qur'an. Right? Little would they know that you and me hardly even turn to Qur'an Kareem. So they're asking Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam about Allah. Alright? It actually comes in hadith specifically that some of the ulama of tafsir mention that there were some sahaba who literally asked the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about where he is, about when should we make dua to him. Alright? And Allah Ta'ala revealed this verse. And what does he say about himself? فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. I mean, without this, you cannot, without these two words, فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ, you cannot understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Without this verse, you will not have the tahammul, you will not have the forbearance to understand and bear the verses in Qur'an where Allah Ta'ala talks about his might and majesty and his wrath and punishment. فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. Allah is saying that I am, فَإِنِّي, indeed, verily, truly, certainly, I am qareeb, I'm near, I'm intimate. And Allah explains, what does it mean he's near? What does it mean he's near? أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِي, that I reply and I answer the da'wah, the call, the plea of a da'i, of the person making dua, the one who calls out to me, supplicates to me, pleads to me. إِذَا دَعَانِي, whensoever they call to me. At that very moment when they call to me, simultaneous to their calling to me, I answer them. Allahu Akbar. So this is not an absent God, it's not a distant God, it's not a hidden God. It's not an abstract God. When you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as he wishes to be known, when you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as he revealed himself to be, you will find incredible things. Alright? So then another thing though, right? What should happen? It's a natural thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making, if you will, a quote unquote rational, logical argument. That if Allah Ta'ala is that being who's going to listen to us, إِذَا دَعَانِي, at the very moment that we call to him, so we should also listen to him. فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي. Alright? What does it mean? And they should respond to me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in the Quran. Right? So it means that we should respond to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي, and they should have iman in me. Right? Why? Because inni qareeb, because ujibu da'wat da'i idha da'ani. Because of that, we should hearken and answer. So what does it mean? It's also telling, you link it back. Right? Fast Ramadan. You have to fast in the month of Ramadan. Have iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. Yarshudun, so that they may have rushd. Rushd means that they may be rightly guided, they may be led aright, they may be on righteous guidance. So this verse also makes us clear, also helps us to understand who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. I'm going to continue now here because I realized too late, unfortunately, that because I was using the slides from last time, I don't have the whole verse here. It was just a portion of the verse I'd done in last year's series, but I actually do want to do more of that verse with you here. So I will read it out to you. It's not in front of you on the slide, the whole verse of 187. أُحِلَّ لَكُمْ لَيْلَةَ الصِّيَامِ الرَّفَثُ إِلَى نِسَائِكُمْ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that it is permitted to you on the nights of fasting, that you may intimately approach your wives. هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنْ. So that part you have on the slide, that they are garments to you and you are garments for them, right? And something we explained in detail. You can go back and hear last year's talk on this slide. All right. But the part I wanted to do, which is very interesting, which is not here on the slide in front of you, then the verse continues, Alim Allahu annakum kuntum takhtanuna anfusakum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that you were, you can say, betraying yourselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that you were betraying yourselves. So this is again something that the ulama of tafsir have, offered many understandings about, maybe this notion that some people thought that they had to fast in this sense at the night as well, and maybe they couldn't do it. Allahu alam, right? Because I didn't find I can't tell you with definite certainty. I didn't feel that there was definitive certainty in the different explanations that the ulama of tafsir were offering, but obviously if somebody looks into it deeper, they will inshallah find that. But the point I want to focus on you, and I'm really regretting that these words aren't there for you on the slide, so you can look it up in your mushaf, that Alim Allahu annakum kuntum takhtanuna anfusakum. That Allah knows that you were deceiving yourself, betraying yourself. So whatever that means, listen to what Allah Ta'ala says about that. Fataba alaykum wa afa ankum. And Allah Ta'ala has turned towards you with His mercy. He relents towards you. Wa afa ankum, and He has pardoned you of it. Allahu Akbar. This is who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So He knows that you were doing khiyana, let's just put it that way. You were doing some indulging, some betrayal, some, right? Your own selves, you were betraying your own selves, and He has turned to you and relented towards you in His mercy. And He has pardoned you. فَالْآنَ بَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. And now you can, be intimate with them, and you may seek what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained for you. وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ. All right. Here I want to take this opportunity to explain another thing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, okay, you may eat and drink all the way until the first white thread becomes clear and distinct from the black thread min al-fajr at the time of dawn. So this is an aspect of horizon. Until when can you eat? When does suhoor end, right? Now, this is important because it's also teaching us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a being who in certain matters is relenting, right? Just like was mentioned above. He knows تَخْتَانُونَ أَنفُسَكُمْ, that you are deceiving, betraying yourselves, but You're relenting towards you. And in other matters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very exact. This is a very exact thing, that you're looking at the horizon, and the very first white thread that appears on the horizon is when I have to stop eating and drinking. So this is why, and the reason I'm mentioning this is that we have to know that there's a balance, and this requires knowledge. It's not a blanket thing that, okay, I know Allah Ta'ala is merciful and He'll forgive me and give me a lot of leeway and He'll be lax with me. No, there's some things He will. Again, فَتَابَ عَلَيْكُمْ وَأَفَى عَنْكُمْ. And there are going to be some things where He wants exactitude from you. And that's why I would humbly suggest to all of us who are listening that you should stop eating and drinking at what scientists and astronomers call astronomical twilight, which is known as 18 degrees, before the first white thread appears, right? And don't think like this, because Allah Ta'ala is not saying this is the passage, this is the chunk. Allah Ta'ala on this matter is not saying that, okay, I can see you eat 2-3 minutes extra, or 5-10 minutes extra, or 15 degrees, 12 degrees, and it's okay. Allah Ta'ala is all merciful, He knows, and He relents towards you. No. Here's being very with exactitude, right? And we submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if there's a place in the Qur'an where He wants a very exact, precise form of obedience to us, that at the very first thread of white appears in something as vast as the horizon, we should stop. It means we should really stop. right? And we should be very careful about that. All right. ثُمَّ أَتِمُّ الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ, and then you complete your fast until, and here I will translate layl as dusk, i.e. sunset. All right, and at that point, وَلَا تُبَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ, and while you're in the state of fasting, you should not be intimate with them, even if you may, وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ, and then this is when you were in a state of itikaf in the masajid. So this is something that the Sunnah of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the last 10 days. So in that you can't eat and drink during the day, but obviously this other activity a person does. You can't eat and drink at night, but this other activity will not take place at night because obviously you're in a state of itikaf in the masjid. Also very interesting for us to learn, by the way, that although we speak of it as Sunnah itikaf, it is an itikaf that is mentioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Qur'an. And here it's it seems to be a norm. That was a very normal standard practice this year because of the conditions in the world. Very few people will have that blessing. We make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant ease and afiyah so that once again in the world, mu'mineen and muslimin may sit in itikaf in the masajid. But it gives us this feeling, right? Akifun, literally, it's a notion of withdrawal, seclusion, retreat in the masajid. Tilka hududullahi fala takrabuha. That these are the boundaries and limits set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't go near them. So again, if the boundary and limit is as soon as the first white thread appears, I should stop eating and drinking, I don't even want to go near it. كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ آيَاتِهِ لِلنَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ. Thus does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make clear the verses of His revelation for all people so that they may attain and adopt and acquire and achieve taqwa. Alright. So, that is it for this part. But what it does is also this last part of the verse makes us realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our master. He has set hudud. Right? It's a very intense relationship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set hudud, boundaries and limits, and we don't even want to go near them. فَلَا تَقْرَبُوهَا. Right? So now you can understand. In this one chunk, we've seen that Allah Ta'ala was soft and tender and merciful. Kutiba alaykum as-siyam. Fataba alaykum. Right? Fa-inni qareeb. Most intimately. Alright, let's go back and just see that again. Fa-inni qareeb. Okay. Ujibu da'wat ad-da'i idha da'an. And it's partly, in a sense, because of that, or along with that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can say, Tilka hududullah. That these are also, and in another sense, they're also boundaries Allah Ta'ala is setting, limits He's placing. La takrubuha, don't go near them. And we say, of course, because if you're being so kind and loving with us, you're so intimately near with us, you reply and hearken and answer our call, our plea, our dua, idha, the very moment that we make dua to you. فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي. Of course, it behooves us that we will answer you. All right? So it's a dynamic relationship. So one very important way to understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is understanding the Abd-Rabb relationship, the Malik-Abd relationship. And the Qur'an Kareem is full of that. So obviously, we can't do that. Those of you who are interested, there are many places where I hope, inshallah, last year we did a decent job of trying to show that in this series last year. So we leave you here for today. And inshallah, I will be doing some of the things that are in the works of Imam al-Ghazālī. I will be doing some things like today, verses of Quran, some hadith, some du'as. We're going to be mixing it up, but all with this notion for us to really understand and know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to develop in our heart true feelings for Him. May Allah Ta'ala accept this from us. May Allah Ta'ala grant all of us ability to always be on the path of knowledge and spirituality, of humility and obedience, of submission. And may Allah Ta'ala bless us in Ramadan, and may He accept our fast in Ramadan. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanallah walhamdulillah wa la ilaha illallah wallahu akbar. Subhanallah al-azim. Subhanallah wa bihamdi, Subhanallah al-Azim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك الرحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. Ya Allah, Rabbi Kareem, we ask that you fill our hearts with knowledge of you, with love for you, with fear of you, with yearning for you, with longing for you. Ya Allah, we ask that you enable us to experience always and forever فَإِنِّي قَرِيب, the haqiqah of your qurb, the hiss of your qurb, the lutf of your qurb, the lazzat of your qurb. Ya Rabbi Kareem, we have made ourselves ba'id. We allowed ourselves to become distant from you, distant from your commands, distant from Qur'an, distant from knowledge. Ya Allah, Rabbi Kareem, you sent Ramadan upon us. Draw us near to you again. Send your hidayah on us again. Ya Allah, soften our hearts towards the deen. Incline our hearts towards the deen. Inspire our hearts towards the deen. Fill our hearts with feelings and passion and desire and talab for deen. Ya Allah, so much of the year we were languishing in our desire for dunya, our attraction for dunya, our work and preoccupations of dunya, our education and our careers, our problem solving of the dunya. Ya Rabbi Kareem, now you brought us into this momentous zaman, this blessed time of Ramadan. Let's turn our hearts towards you. Let's turn our minds and our souls and our beings towards you. Allah, connect us to you in this month of Ramadan. Connect us to Qur'an Kareem. Grant us an eternal, everlasting connection with you. Ya Rabbi Kareem, send your rahmah and mercy on us. Forgive us for our sins in this life. Send your rahmah on us on the day of judgment and admit us into your Jannah, Ya Rabbi Kareem. Ya Rabbi, we make dua for the whole ummah, Ya Rabbi. We are in a state of luxury that we can spend time and learn and talk about you, where so much of the ummah, Ya Rab, is struggling at this moment, struggling to even find something for iftar for their children, struggling in a state of war, or as refugees, or as homeless, or as oppressed, or as unjustly incarcerated and imprisoned, or discriminated against in so many ways. Ya Rab, we make dua for each and every one of them. Send your khas, special, most special rahmah and mercy upon them. Send your nusra and help and succor upon them. Increase us in our ability and our willingness and our sacrifice to be in khidmah and service to the oppressed. Ya Rab, we ask that you take out all the madlumeen from their madlumiyya, do rad of the zulm of the zalimeen, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. Rabbana taqabbal minna innaka anta as-sami'ul alim. وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم وصلى الله تعالى على حبيبه سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين.